So today on the podcast, we begin to work through our monthly set of news stories in which we look at how the Disney company is changing and also how it will likely evolve in the near future. Today, an unusual episode. So 6 years ago, longtime CEO Bob Iger retired and passed off the reins to the company to Bob Chapek. Admittedly, Chapek was not a great executive, but also he was handed a terrible hand to play, a set of unforeseen circumstances that would be difficult for anyone to navigate. Let's call this set of difficult circumstances the Iger retirement curse. Just as Iger was retiring and Chapek was coming into power in February 2020, the world was about to move toward a very large set of problems. The following month, due to the pandemic, all Disney parks closed, the cruise line shut down, and nearly all theaters worldwide closed their doors. This sent nearly every division of the Disney company into crisis mode for a pandemic that would reshape the entertainment industry. Eventually, Bob Chapek was removed as CEO and Bob Iger was brought back, hopefully to help redirect the company and then to pick a new successor. Earlier this year, the company announced that Josh D'Amaro would be Iger's next successor and the next CEO. He was an executive with deep experience in the management of parks, resorts, cruises, and other experiences. Initially, this looked like it would be a reasonably smooth transition. D'Amaro's one big weak spot, which we've talked about before, was that he had no meaningful experience with film production, the TV and cable channels, and streaming. But some of those areas would be supported by Dana Walden, who was given a new role as the company's president and chief creative officer. She had experience in TV content creation as well as streaming and talent relations, which would shore up a lot of the perceived weaknesses in D'Amaro's skill set. And then about a month after the announcement, earlier this week, the transition from Iger to D'Amaro began to happen. On the studio lot not far from the famous animation building are a pair of sound stages, Soundstage 2 and Soundstage 4. Usually, the exterior walls of these sand-colored stages hold oversized promotional images for upcoming films and TV shows. But instead of images promoting Disney projects at the start of the third week of March, on the exterior of Soundstage 2, Disney put up one very large image that said, "Thank you, Bob," and then across the way, on Soundstage 4, a similar image that said, "Welcome, Josh." Across it all was a golden sprinkling of pixie dust, added by Tinkerbell, who was also included in the image. But once more, with what I again call the Iger retirement curse, the Disney company found an unexpected set of problems left at its door. Rising gas prices, a stock market that was losing 10% of its value, and also problems with two significant technology partnerships that not long ago executives believed would help Disney transition into a forward-looking company with a greater focus on tech, which has always been one weak area for Disney. And that is what we're going to look at today. This new set of problems that again have arrived with Iger's departure, and more specifically, how a changing world has sent some large challenges to Disney just at the time that a new person is about to become CEO. A first week for any CEO is always a difficult time, but the first week for Josh D'Amaro's time as CEO has been particularly difficult. And so, let's jump into all of that today. Let's start with this, the Disney stock price. As I write this, it's again back down in the low 90s per share, which is a 10-month low. But to expand our view on this for a moment, the larger problem is this. For roughly 4 years, the Disney stock price now has existed in a narrow price channel, dipping at times to $83 and rising at times to $122, but never getting out of that range. It's been up and down between these two poles many times. Compared to 5 years ago, when the Disney stock was at $197 per share, it has now lost half of its value, which makes Disney stock a tremendous underperformer in the market as a whole. The Dow over that same period of time has risen by about 55%. Again, to put this in context, it means that during this period, Disney didn't just stagnate and slightly underperform, it significantly underperformed. Or to put it another way, if you put $100 in Disney stock 3 years ago, you'd have about $100 today. But if you put that same $100 in a Dow index fund, one that matched the movement overall of the Dow, you'd have about $145. Part of the company's underperformance has to do with some very poor decisions made by ex-CEO Bob Chapek, particularly in terms of overinvestment in the streaming service and an underinvestment in the parks, particularly the parks wholly owned by Disney. Some of this underperformance also has to do with cultural issues that were accelerated by the pandemic, such as more people choosing to stay home and watch streamers rather than go out to the movies. And some of it simply has to do with changing technology patterns, the declining world of linear and cable TV, which is being replaced by the less profitable streaming services. Now add into all of this some cyclical content issues, such as Marvel suffering from both general superhero fatigue in the marketplace and also the specific inability to effectively launch a post-Endgame multi-film storyline. And then there are some hit-and-miss films from both Disney Animation and Pixar, and also some hit-or-miss offerings from Star Wars. Andor was a hit, while the Book of Boba Fett was more of a miss. The parks during this time remained profitable, but without an infusion of new e-ticket attractions, again an issue stemming from Bob Chapek's time as CEO, the parks are making less money than they would under better conditions. This issue, the one about maxing out parks' profitability, was one of the first things that Bob Iger, once he returned to the company a few years ago, tried to correct by initiating a reinvestment strategy in the parks for large attractions and for new lands. To fix this whole mess with the parks, though, is going to take years to design those rides, to build them, and then finally to open them. So, for the last 2 years, as we've talked about the proposed expansions to the American parks, we've always put in this one little caveat that these projects will be built unless there is a change in company priorities, which with Josh D'Amaro, a parks person in charge, now seems unlikely, or if there was a significant recession. And this there is that first problem that Josh D'Amaro now has to deal with. There's not a recession in the U.S., but there are now a few indicators pointing possibly in that direction. With issues in the Middle East and rising fuel prices, a recession or perhaps a simple economic downturn is starting to seem a little more likely in the States. And rising fuel costs might be the one element that make the current bad situation, namely the American parks without significant new attractions to drive attendance, into one that is markedly worse. First of all, let's put this too into context. Earlier this year, Disney admitted that it was seeing fewer international tourists coming to Disney World. International tourists tend to stay more at long-term rentals off property, so compared to domestic visitors who tend to stay on property, the Disney company has less robust information on this group, largely because Disney has been receiving nuanced spending activity about the habits of on-property guests, and they weren't receiving the same level of information from guests who stayed off property. But Disney has acknowledged that American politics is keeping some foreign visitors out of the country and therefore out of Disney World. As a result of this, late in 2025, Disney shifted its promotional strategies for Disney World. Hugh Johnston, Disney CFO, explained, "Well, as a result of that, we pivoted our marketing and sales efforts, promotional as well as marketing efforts, to a more domestic audience, and we've been able to keep attendance rates high from that perspective." So, about 6 months ago, Disney engaged a market pivot. They introduced a lot of discounts that they believed would fill vacancies left by international tourists who were choosing not to visit the U.S. this year, with domestic tourists who were coming because Disney was now offering them a number of pretty good deals. But then with the war or the conflict or the military excursion in Iran came a new set of pressures that had the potential now to limit domestic visitation as well to the American Disney parks, particularly to Disney World. Here's how this breaks down and how it begins to undercut what had been Disney's 2026 marketing strategy for Disney World. With higher gas prices, Orlando will see fewer visitors who arrive by car, mostly from Florida and the Southeast. Fuel prices will also affect the cost of air travel and will reduce the number of families who fly into Orlando as well. With higher fuel costs, some middle-class families, which really are the bread and butter of Disney World, will be less likely to book expensive vacations as available income, once earmarked for those vacations, may now be needed to cover daily expenses such as for gas, for food, and for heating bills. And for some families that do still go to Orlando, and there'll be a lot of those, they may now need to cut back on non-essentials, such as deluxe or even on-property Disney hotels, table service meals, expensive souvenirs, and various add-ons such as lightning lanes. None of these elements will cause the parks to empty out, but they can lead to declining attendance and also to Disney making less profit per visitor because those visitors are more conscious of spending, especially as some costs inside the resort, such as meals, might rise to the increased cost of food and other supplies. For the last year, Disney has been very clear that they have been looking to increase their margins, which for them means getting more money out of every guest that visits Disney World and Disneyland, rather than increasing the overall number of guests in the parks. But with rising fuel costs, that margin strategy, which worked reasonably well in 2025 for Disney, now looks like it might be a lot less successful in the second half of 2026. And I also know that for many listeners here, the price of gas is now painful, but perhaps not yet to the point where it requires large changes in spending. But in terms of planning for an expensive vacation, it's all about perceptions of the future. Most families don't need to be in the space of significant budget cutbacks to opt for a less expensive vacation or even a staycation. They simply need to think that household budget cutbacks could be a possibility later in the year, which might make them feel a little foolish in booking an expensive vacation if there was a possibility that they would need that money somewhere else in the family budget in 6 or 7 months from now. And at least in North America, we are definitely in that space right now, where there is reasonable uncertainty as to what the future holds for us economically, and perception here again by itself can be a strong deterrent for a Disney World vacation. And so here, let me break down the effects of gas prices on Disney World visitation, dollar by dollar. If the national average for a gallon of gas returns to $3, visitation to the parks will also return to typical patterns with reasonably full parks. Visitation patterns will take a few months to rise again as most people plan a vacation to Disney World long in advance, but to get gas prices down to this level, you would need oil prices to drop significantly, political tensions in the Middle East to ease, and supply chains to return to normal. And in the next 6 months, I do think that all of that as a complete package is unlikely, even if America and Israel pull out of the Iran conflict tomorrow. Disrupted systems in some cases will now take a while to come fully back online. This type of recovery, if it happens, seems more likely to affect visitation in early 2027 than it does for summer and fall 2026. If, however, the national average for a gallon of gas is $4, and this is where gas prices are today, just over $4, you should see a dip in attendance at Disney World, perhaps 3% or 4%, and also some reduced spending as families need to spend more on gas, food, and other things. $4, which is where we are now, is the point where Disney should see slightly fewer guests driving to the resort and also see some guests pivot away from upscale options such as lightning lanes and multiple table service meals. Again, this type of economy undercuts what has been Disney's primary financial strategy with the parks for the past 18 months. To increase per guest spending and then to expand profit margins at the resorts. If, however, the national average for a gallon of gas goes up to $5, Disney should see a 6 to 7% drop in drive-in visitors. Also, a national average of $5 is the point where a significant number of middle-class families will begin to delay or rethink expensive vacations, as some of what had been identified as disposable income may now be needed to cover daily bills. I'd say that there's maybe a 40% chance of this happening in the next 6 months, that the average for a gallon of gas gets to $5. To get there, oil would need to hit about $135 or $140 a barrel, probably as a result of a multi-month conflict with Iran and an ongoing partial closure of the Strait of Hormuz. To put this pricing in a larger context, at the start of the year, oil was $52 a barrel. It recently spiked to $110, but today, as I write this, it's $106. So a continued rise to $135 per barrel is within the realm of reasonable probability over the next 6 months. Lastly, if the national average for a gallon of gas goes up to $6, and admittedly this is a 50% increase as to where gas prices are today, visitation to Disney World would likely fall by 10 to 15%. And at that point, you should see a significant decline in add-on and premium experiences such as Lightning Lane tour packages, deluxe hotels, and signature meals. Some visitors will also shift their reservations from on-property hotels to less expensive options off-property. Gas at a national average of $6 per gallon is a less likely scenario, one that probably requires an expansion in the Middle East conflict or some secondary issues. I would put this at a 10 to 15% probability. But earlier in the year, this outcome would have had something close to a 0% probability. So an average price of $6 would be an extreme case, but something that now, in a small way, is on the table. And along with concerns about fuel, Americans just aren't seeing higher prices at the pump. They're also seeing the value of their investments decline. In the past 45 days, the Dow has fallen about 10%, which is typically the point where average investors start to get a little nervous. Lower stock prices, combined with higher interest rates, slower economic growth, and a cooling job market, might be signs that the company is moving toward a recession. For clarity, even if consumers are feeling pain at the pump, we aren't in a recession right now. But there are some worrying economic markers out there right now. These should be especially worrisome for entertainment companies like Disney that rely on families having disposable income to purchase their products and experiences. And for clarity, this isn't just a Disney problem, it's a tourism problem. For March 2026, Vegas has seen about 7 to 8% fewer visitors than it did last March. And Vegas, in situations like this, is usually the canary in the coal mine. Visitation to Vegas tends to drop first and faster compared to visitation to Disney World, largely because people plan longer and often save more for a Disney World trip. But what we're seeing right now in Vegas suggests that Disney World and Central Florida in general are likely to see leaner times in the months ahead. For a while now here on the podcast, we've talked about how a lack of new e-ticket attractions has produced lower demand for Disney vacations in the U.S. Simply, potential visitors are waiting until Disney opens new attractions that makes them want to go again. This has been a problem for about a year and a half, and typically when there are no new attractions to drive attendance, Disney shifts to discounts. And that is exactly what happened here. To look at the specific effects now from an ongoing lack of reinvestment in the American parks, particularly for Florida, let's spin back the calendar by about 45 days to just before U.S. and Israel attacked Iran, spurring issues with worldwide oil supply. Disney knew back then that they had an attendance problem. Only they thought that their summer attendance problem would be due to a lack of new e-ticket rides at Disney World. So back in February, before bombs started dropping in the Middle East, Disney was already heavily discounting Disney World vacations to increase the overall visitation to what Disney would define as a desirable target. And for this, we do have some actual data. Before COVID, let's say back in 2019, most Disney World hotels were at 90% occupancy on average, maybe a little more, which is a strong position in the world of hotels. After the whole mess with COVID, in 2023, Disney World hotels were at 85% occupancy. But this also was during the period where families were still traveling a lot after the pandemic. I don't have numbers for 2025 or 2026, but clearly these numbers are lower. I'm guessing that right now we're seeing average occupancy rates between 75 and 80% at most Disney hotels. The one outlier is Coronado Springs, which relies on convention traffic. Anecdotally, I know that some hotels on property at times recently have been down in the 60th percentile. But also I'm guessing that this is only a representation of particularly bad weeks out there. Disney, of course, would love to fill every room every night, but simply that's not a realistic goal. So what is a realistic target for Disney World hotel occupancy? Well, looking over the last dozen years and subtracting out the disasters of 2020 and 2021 due to COVID, Disney seems to be comfortable with an occupancy rate in the upper 80s in terms of percentages. So the deals that I'm going to list off in a moment were part of a marketing and promotion strategy to get Disney World hotels as close to the upper 80s during summer 2026 as possible. There were a long line of deals earlier this year. These are just a sample, but some of them are the best hotel deals I've seen in years. Again, all of these deals were announced before the conflict in Iran and the spike in gas prices. So before the current oil-related economic issues, these were the deals that Disney felt they needed to offer to fill hotel rooms and their parks later this year. A general hotel discount for anyone of up to 30% off room rates. Florida residents received hotel discounts of up to 35%. Annual pass holder hotel discounts were up to 40%, and this discount at times placed some moderate hotels at under $200 per night. Then there was this. You could book a 6-night stay with 6 days of tickets, and you'd get 2 free nights and 2 free days of tickets. Or if you lived in Florida, you could buy a 4-day theme park ticket starting at $64 per day. And beyond this, there were 2 different free dining offers, including one offer, that's the free dining for kids offer, that could be stacked on top of other offers and discounts, which was unusual because Disney rarely let guests stack multiple offers for one stay at Disney World. And these were the discounts that Disney was offering at the start of the year, when Disney believed its largest concern was a lack of new attractions and rides. That is, these were the offers that Disney floated before gas prices spiked and the stock market lost 10% of its value. What will Disney now need to offer to fill its roughly 36,000 hotel rooms and villas in Florida, and also its 4 theme parks and 2 water parks? That is a terrific question, and one that I suspect a team of Disney managers is exploring right now. In early spring, Disney can usually fill some value rooms with school and youth trips, largely for sports, dance, and cheerleading competitions and spring training over at the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex. These bring in typically a lot of high schoolers and also their parents. But that buffer in terms of attendance pools will end by May, which I think is when park visitation and hotel occupancy problems will really begin. And one more thing before we move on. In multiple previous episodes, we've suggested that an economic downturn would be most disruptive for 2 large projects already announced by Disney. The first is Villains Land in Florida, on which there's been little physical work done except for some ground clearing, and the Avatar Pandora project proposed for DCA, on which no physical work at all has been done on site. These are the 2 projects right now to watch in terms of cutbacks, delays, and maybe even cancellation. As I've suggested before, if Disney doesn't greenlight 2 more Avatar movies, I suspect the Avatar expansion at DCA might be in a little trouble anyways, as when it opens, I guess in 5 years, the last Avatar movie, and by that I mean Fire and Ash, will be a faint flicker in the memories of most guests. And so, generally, this is where we are this month in terms of the parks, but there's another set of problems that Josh D'Amaro will need to face in terms of that Iger retirement curse. And that story is up next. Josh D'Amaro's first week problems didn't just involve economic and political forces as they affected the parks. Josh walked onto the job and soon found other serious problems as well. The problem that got the most media attention this last week, and also the one that I would say is the least significant from the standpoint of the company, involved the TV series The Bachelorette. The day after D'Amaro became CEO, a video appeared featuring the star of the upcoming Bachelorette season clearly engaged in domestic violence. The Bachelorette is a staple on ABC, but also a show that has seen an audience decline in recent years. The new Bachelorette was supposed to be Taylor Frankie Paul. Paul has been married and divorced once with 2 children from that marriage, and subsequently she had a 3rd child with a longtime boyfriend. Paul has been a TikTok influencer and was featured in the reality show The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Paul was already a risky candidate around which to build a reality show, as she'd pleaded guilty to domestic violence charges against her boyfriend in 2023. But this past week, TMZ posted a 3-minute video of Paul throwing multiple bar stools at her then boyfriend at home, while her young daughter was in the room near where the stools were landing. At this point, Disney, which is protective of its family identity, had little choice other than to cancel the already filmed season of The Bachelorette. Disney didn't say that they would absolutely never air this season. Maybe it shows up at some point edited with a disclaimer on Hulu, but they fully walked away from the filmed, edited, ready-to-go season at least for this year. The cost of production has been estimated at around $60 million. And this will likely be one of the situations that Dana Walden cleans up, not Josh D'Amaro, as this falls squarely under TV content and talent management. But also, I'm pretty sure that despite the hoopla, this will be a blip in the company's history. It was probably the right thing to do to cancel the season based on the 3-minute video posted on TMZ. The other problems that Josh D'Amaro walked into, though not as splashy as those with The Bachelorette, were probably more troubling in terms of the future of the company. The other two involved tech, and for anyone who has ever used the Disney apps in the parks or queued up for Disney event tickets or a Disney merchandise drop, you've probably discovered that even when Disney is using third-party software, the experience is often buggy, even to the point of ticket sales being rescheduled to an entirely different day. So it was no surprise then when Disney, trying to expand out its tech footprint, looked to two companies for ways to further leverage their characters and stories into new online spaces. In 2023, Disney became a permanent pillar inside the game ecosystem Fortnite, with an ongoing development deal through Epic Games. The following year, this included a $1.5 billion investment in Epic, a deal that allowed Disney to further develop that universe inside of Fortnite. Essentially, the plan was that Fortnite would be one of the primary places where gamers could interact with characters from Disney, Marvel, and Star Wars. This gave Disney access to a well-managed interactive game platform and also access to hundreds of millions of existing Fortnite users. The other deal involved OpenAI's text-to-video generation platform, Sora. In December 2025, that is just a few months ago, Disney announced that it would partner with Sora to allow 200 Disney-owned characters to be included in Sora videos. This would be a 3-year development deal with a $1 billion investment from Disney. And somewhat like that Epic Games deal, this would also integrate Disney IP into online spaces, managed and developed by successful outside companies. But then also during D'Amaro's first week, OpenAI announced that it would shut down its Sora app, which then in turn canceled Disney's deal and investment with OpenAI. Officially, OpenAI said it was losing too much money on Sora, specifically through compute costs for creating videos. This effectively removed Disney's plans to engage in some type of AI-focused online space. And also, Epic Games announced that they too were losing money on Fortnite, so they would lay off about 20% of their workforce, which is roughly 1,000 employees. Epic's plans to develop a Disney universe inside Fortnite officially are moving forward, but the layoffs highlight that there is declining interest in Fortnite among users. In December 2025, Fortnite saw about 1.3 million daily players. In March 2026, though, about 900,000, which is a decline of 400,000 daily players in just a few months. Epic is looking for seasonal updates to lure players back, but generally it now looks like Disney may have tied another aspect of its online presence to a multi-game platform that appears to be more on its way down in terms of popularity rather than on its way up. So whereas Disney will rather quickly move on from that whole Bachelorette fiasco, I'm sure there's some way to thoughtfully use that $60 million loss to offset profits elsewhere in terms of tax strategies. The two tech deals with OpenAI and Epic Games are more troubling, as this again moves Disney further outside the rapidly evolving gaming and tech world, which is a space that Disney has repeatedly tried to enter in various ways for years. And this now is another challenge that Josh Damaro ended up with during his first week on the new job. For our last story, something that is a little more lighthearted, especially since our first two stories were a little more serious in nature. Earlier this week, the World of Frozen opened at Disneyland Paris, and it looks lovely. But there was one mishap that quickly turned viral, even to the point that I saw it on various TV news programs. And of course, it was about the Olaf animatronic. The impressive, free-walking animatronic of Olaf came out to meet crowds with a song. This animatronic can freely walk through the park and engage in what appears to be spontaneous interactions and scripted shows. But this past Monday, during one performance, he went stiff, his eyes locked into place. He stood there for a moment before falling backwards, very slowly backwards, down onto the cobblestone walkway with his carrot nose falling off with a plastic clink. Just so you know, his carrot nose is supposed to be removable. Then two cast members dressed in dark blue and gray came out to carry the stiff Olaf off stage. And this is where things got a little strange. Newspapers, albeit maybe not the most rigorous of newspapers that carried this story, used the following headlines to describe the incident. Some of the early headlines were rather pedestrian, such as, Olaf the Snowman drops dead. But then writers got a little more creative. The New York Post wrote, Olaf just melted. The U.S. Sun musically quipped, Do you want to rebuild a snowman? Vulture said, R.I.P. Robo Olaf, 2025 to 2026. USA Today, Olaf animatronic appears frozen during debut. People magazine, Olaf animatronic melted down. And then many people on social media decided to jump in with quips like, Olaf just went into the unknown, and he realized he was in France and just gave up. Another suggested, this is just like me after seeing my bank account when I get back from Disney. And another user said, this is why Elsa keeps him inside. Yet another user mashing up Frozen and Toy Story quipped, Andy is coming. And another user matched up Inside Out with Frozen when considering how children in the crowd will remember this incident. Core memory unlocked. Olaf collapsed in front of me. My favorite, though, of the bunch was this. First, AI learns to talk, then it learns despair. In the end, the image of Olaf ragdolling backwards onto the ground will likely live on in various melted memes for years. And if nothing else, the various responses to that incident, essentially the animatronic shutting down mid-show, made me smile for a moment. And it also made the world seem a little more normal. Humorous witticisms about a computerized figure not finishing its show, even if elsewhere the company this week was facing larger and more serious problems. And just so you know, as with any sophisticated animatronic post-Yeti, Disney does have a backup plan when the Olaf animatronic goes down. This has been a requirement for sophisticated animatronics at Disney for a while now to have a B plan. For example, in Navi River Journey, when the animatronic of the shaman goes down, a screen comes down over that space on which is projected the image of that shaman moving so the ride, for the most part, can continue as usual. Over in Paris, Disney's B plan for the Olaf animatronic is a life-sized Olaf puppet. This puppet is similar to those animal puppets used in the Merry Menagerie at Christmas at Animal Kingdom. A puppeteer controls the mouth and arms with his hands while the feet remain stationary. This type of puppet would likely be used more in shows than for walking around the land, whereas the animatronic did both. And one more thing for the week. In case Paris is not in your immediate travel plans, Disney is already developing an Olaf animatronic for the Frozen area at Hong Kong Disneyland. In an interview, Imagineers have also said that they are planning to bring the Olaf animatronic to Disney World and Disneyland. And I'll leave you with this speculative thought. At Disney World, the Olaf animatronic would clearly go in the Norway Pavilion. But where would it go at Disneyland? It could be arranged into a stage show, or it could move freely through an area like Toontown. Locations don't always match the character. For example, about 15 years ago, before there was a launch bay at Hollywood Studios, Darth Vader used to do meet and greets in the animation courtyard. But something like that doesn't seem ideal. So maybe, and just maybe, as the Olaf animatronic in each of those other 3 locations would almost surely be in a Frozen-focused area. Was this a slip as the Disney possibly returning to plans to create a small Frozen area at Disneyland? There's nothing that's been announced, so this is just speculation. But I know this concept has been considered for at least 2 locations at the Disneyland Resort. And I'm just saying there's some land around Small World where the old motorboat cruise used to be, plus a little backstage area that's not used very much, plus that Autopia course could be shortened up a little. You don't need a whole lot of land to do this. The Norway Pavilion, including the ride show building, is about 2 acres, and the World of Frozen in Paris is about 7.5 acres. The land that Disney could use from those areas at Disneyland that I already listed would be in the middle of those 2 figures. And if you build a Frozen Arendelle area there and manage the sightlines well, then from inside Disneyland's version of Arendelle, the Matterhorn in the background might look just a little like Elsa's snowy North Mountain, the future home to her ice palace. Just saying that some existing elements here could be leveraged to create a pretty nice little show area on that side of the park. And for clarity again here, nothing has been officially announced about any Arendelle area coming to Disneyland, though I do know this has been considered for many years. The only tidbit of actual news here was an Imagineer saying that the animatronic would eventually come to Disneyland. But maybe behind that, there might be a little more quietly going on there. To be clear again, anything beyond the announcement of just the animatronic is pure speculation on my part. And with that, we are now through all of our news stories for the week. The plan right now is to return next week with a new episode. Lastly, as you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just 2 things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us over on Bandcamp as monthly subscribers. On Bandcamp, you will find over 300 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in our show notes. So, until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.